And we're back on the forest at night. I am joined tonight. I have brought to you, my audience, a representative of a terrifyingly dangerous cult, the Headless Blood Idol. Priest, would you like to introduce yourself? You can
Yes.
you can completely give me shit for calling you a priest, by the way.
That's right. I like the idea that I'm somehow ordained in spiritual matters that can influence the metaphysical direction of the world.
The silent goat walks with you, priest. Please tell me your name.
My name, I'm known around the internet as doktorb, although lots of people mispronounce it and call me Dr. B. But please don't call me doktorb.
See, you're already, I am known by the name doktorb. Is, the most priest answer. We're already on the path here.
The tone was set.
We are on the way to enlightenment in the ways of the Headless Blood Idol. So I guess my first question is, what is Headless Blood Idol, and what does it do?
Well, Headless Blood Idol started as kind of this weird mistake.
Like most religions.
So,
Not up carpenter.
When it first began, it was literally, everything that kind of started from Magenta Skull, who is our fearless leader and coordinator of all directions. And so, yeah, she had set up way back in the olden days, in the 2000s, she'd run a mashup radio show and was looking to get back into music. And so she set up the Headless Blood Idol Twitter account, and had bought an internet radio license thing, and was thinking of kind of getting involved in doing that stuff. And parallel to that, she'd been running a Discord server, and she'd invited a bunch of people from various different internet musics into that server. Anyway, so as to try and kickstart the radio station, Jen asked one of our kind of first people to do anything, who was Waffle Assembly, to provide a DJ mix of his stuff, so that she could play it on the radio station, and he gave her a video instead of an audio file. And that made Jen think, well, maybe I should actually start streaming stuff and do this as a visual thing. So she streamed at this stage, it was just her, this 45-minute visual DJ mix of chaotic breakcore stuff, and kind of started a conversation. Maybe we should do a live stream with other people. And so Headless Blood Idol kind of started out of that mistake, which was a fortuitous, the universe intervening and making the thing that had to manifest. Anyway, and so in the server at the time, there was a bunch of people who were we kind of split between old people, which I am a representative of, who'd been kind of in music and around music for most of their lives, but kind of at the current moment didn't quite have a home. And then sort of younger people, I guess, who, were sort of interested in getting started, interested in, doing live stream events and that sort of a thing. And so we just sort of thought that it would be cool to start doing live streaming events, and set the bar low enough that, basically anybody who wanted to can kind of participate. And so the idea was just 15-minute sets. It's a good amount of time for people to be able to feel it's enough to say something, but not so much that it's really, really hard to do. And the idea being people kind of have a go at putting together their own mixes and their own video, and, and then we'll stream it. And we wanted to make it kind of open to anyone. And it's a sort of a low stakes, kind of easy, supportive way to get started in the modern music, internet scene or whatever. And Headless Blood Idol started out of that. And so mostly what we do is we've been running these things that we call community group shows. And a lot of the artists that perform perform through the community group shows come out of the Discord server, but we tend to, throw open this call to people on Twitter, and we're always welcoming anybody who's got any interest in kind of getting started or, looking for a home. We want to be that place for people, I guess. And then when we started last year, we got this idea to do a compilation every year of just kind of the things that were sort of generally happening around sort of internet music that year. And so at the moment, we've been running these group shows, and we've sort of got this annual compilation that we put out. And this year we're sort of branching out into kind of smaller, more targeted shows because I guess like the Blood Idol thing is that we don't really care about genre. You know, we come from lots of different backgrounds and lots of different scenes. Even though I guess like the core nucleus comes out of, you know, like early net label breakcore stuff. You know, the kind of extended group of people come from lots of different things. And so it's just kind of bringing people from like different sounds and stuff together in the one place. So we can kind of a document of all of the different interesting things that are happening.
Hell yeah. So you mentioned this compilation, and that is primarily what we're here to talk about today. The deadline for this compilation is April 2nd, correct?
No, we're gonna keep it open till the end of May.
Okay.
I think, yeah, we'll keep it open till the end of May. Yeah. We wanted to make sure we sort of opened it a month ago, and we thought, you know, if we're only doing one of these a year, if we keep things open for people, you know, people are busy, people don't, you know, they're not living off this in most case. So just like nice long amount of time, people can kind of get something that they're happy with and they feel like represents them to kind of put out there in the world.
Absolutely. You mentioned that while there is no particular art direction currently, as far as, you know, anyone can submit, you know, to coin, you know, to cop a phrase from my other station that I DJ on, Data Fruits, you can play any song. Any song. But you also mentioned that primarily the audience that we have seemed to attract here has been early breakcore, more experimental. Let me ask you this. What do you want to see? Because I know you personally do a lot of Plunderphonics kind of remixes, a lot of sample work, and having listened to a decent amount of Magenta's work, I imagine that the majority of the kinds of people you're attracting are going to be on the types of people that listen to my show. By the way, if you're listening, submit a track. I know you have something you've been working on. You can submit it. It'll be fine. Go ahead, finish it up. I believe in you. Submit the track. But, you know, outside of the people who listen to my show and the kind of music you would expect, what's the most out there genre that you've ever gotten from one of these comps? And what's the most out there, like off the fucking top of your head, what do you want to hear more of?
Chaos.
Chaos. Fair.
Music. I like music to be chaotic. Yeah, I don't know if that's like... If that's more of a representation of like my own like brain and how it works creatively and logically, but I like it when things just like spin off in directions that I didn't expect them to. And I like it when things move fast, you know, and kind of implode and just are reborn into themselves. I like chaos personally. I mean, if you're talking about like a personal aesthetic, and I guess that's been like a thing. It's been an interesting thing actually. I, as an old person, and I think there's good and bad in this. Sorry, I'm going to go on a bit of a weird tangent.
Go for it. Okay. You got as much time as you want, darling. Go for it. Let's get weird. What you got?
Fine. Like I'm interested in how, you know, like present day, or not present day, probably like about 10 years ago, there seemed to be this like shift towards things getting calm. Like there's this, you know, for the last, since about, since sort of the 2010s, there's been this kind of real interest in ambient music and kind of texture and vaporwave is an extension of that. And I'm kind of this weird sort of tangential, chaotic add-on to the vaporwave, kind of the vaporwave, I don't know what you call it, life form. I'm sort of like bolted onto the side of the Borg. And it's really interesting to me because I'm kind of like, in the old days, and admittedly the old days were bad because in some senses, because they were like full of like really edgy dorks that, were being transgressive and pretending it was political, but really they were just out to like create harshness that hurt people,
Ariel
and so
that being the media example that comes to my mind.
Yeah, and just sort of like, like and really early kind of like shitcore and early breakcore, like internet breakcore stuff that, tried to like use slurs and say things, you know, and bring in kind of all sorts of different violences as a way of just kind of like being transgressive, and sort of like whether that was representative of people's politics or not is like, you know, another thing. Anyway, so I'm really interested because it's kind of like we went through these like dark ages of just like edgy fuckwits, or like just like a fuckwit aesthetic. The people weren't necessarily fuckwits, and then you kind of go from there, and you got like, you know, this kind of calm period of, you know, slowed down lounge music and, you know, and like synth pads that play like a single chord for 10 minutes and it's beautiful or whatever. And like what I'm interested in is like, okay, we've cleaned out all the edgy crap. We've cleaned out, you know, all of the kind of scuzzy, nasty shit in a lot of ways. Well, not all of it, but, you know, and it's like, I want to know how we bring the chaos back into this piece. Like, how do you inject that chaos back in and make that chaos something that's, you know, gonna be positive and constructive and like, you know, nourishing for the world it like enters?
How do you make sure the chaos is meant for everyone, rather than just specific angry white boys in their fucking basement?
Yeah, exactly. And on top of that, it's like I'm really interested in this idea about like, you know, because like for me, and like I've always tended towards making and, you know, and being involved in more chaotic music. It's like, how do you make chaos like therapeutic in a way that's like it's healing. It's like chaos doesn't need to be, and you know, there's the cliche about how like it's just like a catharsis, and so it's supposed to be ugly and violent and blah blah blah. And I'm like, well, I challenge that, and I'm like, you can be chaotic in different ways. It doesn't always need to channel this like destruction. You know, there's joyful chaos. You know, chaos can be fun. Chaos can be zany. Chaos can be colorful. Chaos doesn't need to be, you know, like slurs and violence and like blowing off steam because, you know, your parents didn't love you or you know, or whatever it is. You know, it's like you just like, how can we like, you know, kind of, how can we like bring something into it that's like, you know, gonna build?
How do we fuse this warm, comfy mindset that things like vaporwave bring to the more chaotic nature of things like breakcore or harsh noise? How do we build that community and make it
exactly 100%? And it's something like I try to do that. I mean, like I don't want to talk about my own stuff, but it's something that I try to do.
Talk about your own stuff, please. I'm gonna ask about it later, so you better do it now.
The stuff I do with my own music, I guess, is like I can't hold a thought in my head for very long, you know, and so vaporwave's kind of meditative qualities, they don't really work for me as an organism. So like I like the idea of kind of like dredging up cultural junk and just like finding ways to recontextualize it and, you know, and sort of like make it relevant and make it kind of say different things, make it talk through my mouth and stuff. But I really can't kind of like slow, peaceful loops and stuff like that. It's just not me. And, you know, and so it's like my whole thing has been kind of like, how can we take junk and turn it into something that, you know, is kind of like noisy and chaotic and like abrasive in a fun way, not abrasive in a alienating or like way that makes people feel like they don't want to be near it.
Something more akin to the early days of hardcore.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I know you have a track, and I was actually going to bring this up later on in the interview because it amused the shit out of me. You have a track title that explicitly references "What the fuck is up, Denny's?"
Oh yeah.
The burb shall have its revenge on Denny's. What the fuck is up? And I'm wondering if the kind of community-based aspect that that you're trying to foster here, and the rest of you folks at Blood Idol, and me when I eventually join the roster. New show coming in a few months. Be prepared for that, folks. You know, if it's reminiscent of those old days of bands like Page 99 or Orchid or, you know, old Nintendo Core acts, and that resurgence nowadays with bands like CU Space Cowboy or Zombie Shark, how they're trying to bring that atmosphere of everyone is here to fucking party back.
Definitely. Definitely. And it's something that, you know, we've, it's funny as well, because you mentioned like, you know, bands like Page 99, like I know those bands, but because I'm Australian, like my context is like interestingly different, because I'm like, yeah, hardcore, and it's like a bunch of bands that no one's ever heard of because they're like floating in the southern seas. But yeah, that's definitely something, you know, it's kind of like, it's something that I think that we talk about a lot. and it's about, like, we are political people or whatever, but at the same time as being political people, it's kind of like part of being political is like politics is like a whole way of life, right? I mean, I'm probably editorializing, and Magenta's going to hear this and be like, what the fuck is he talking about? But the way that I see it is that, like, politics is this, like, whole way of life, which includes having fun, and doing things that are, like, constructive and enjoyable, and having a party that, brings people into the space. And so it's like we're kind of conscious of the fact that, like, what we do is provide an entertainment that should be fun and inclusive and enjoyable and energizing, and that, like, that's exactly it. It's like, people can kind of, bring in serious topics and talk about things that are important to them, and put their kind of soul to bear in their music and in whatever it is that they prepare for the show. But for the shows, but the idea behind it is really to just make, it's an opportunity to kind of bring cool people together to make things happen, make the world a better place by, having a party that, puts something good in the world.
You can't afford to be neutral on a moving train, and we're going to wreck the motherfucker. I personally, listeners of my show know this, we are an explicitly anti-fascist program. I don't think I've ever explicitly mentioned this on the show before, but I actually explicitly made this show as a direct response to the rise of not only Nazi bands, just constantly being all over the fucking news in the black metal scene back when I was working with Ophelia Drowning. Obviously, I'm still working with Ophelia Drowning. But partially because of that, and because there wasn't a single goddamned outlet once the label I was working with shut down during the pandemic that gave people like myself, I am a trans woman, people like myself a voice or an audience. And so I actually explicitly started this program not only to, say fuck you to fascists, because, again, this is an explicitly anti-fascist program. I am explicitly an anarchist by political affiliation. But also to give a voice to the kinds of people that were left out in those in those markets in black metal, trans women, people of color, everyone else who was denied a voice in black metal because the fucking scene was being primarily dominated by white, usually racist as fuck dudes. So I can very much respect and appreciate that. I would wager a guess that with politics being a way of life, as you mentioned, I would not necessarily counter, but I would ask, by way of life, do you mean way of approaching the world? A way of being in the world, to take a phrase from a philosopher who I probably should not be referencing here? Or are you more referring to politics as a way of being is how you approach the interactions in your community? And how does that influence? Because I would imagine that having this origin of wanting to be more inclusive, wanting to be, I'd imagine you folks are squarely on the left. How do you approach that?
That's a really good question. And
not only
I
with
think
Headless Blood Idol, but in your own work as well.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think I'll tackle that in like two parts.
Please.
I think that that like what you said is spot on in terms of that, like, at least speaking for myself, because I don't want to put words in anyone else's mouth, I see politics as being like a way of approaching the world that is not like capital P politics necessarily, but it's kind of like the way that, it flows through into the way that you approach individual people, and and the way that you have conversations, and the way that you approach everyday situations, which includes having fun, and having fun in a way that that like is good for the world. And I think that the way that we've kind of approached, it's something that's come up recently, just with and I don't want to get into drama, and I don't want to kind of like raise any kind of like, but it's like making assumptions about like people and then finding out that they, when we kind of like dug a bit deeper into who they were, that they weren't what we thought they were necessarily, and then having to kind of deal with that, and in terms of kind of like, we've platformed certain things that even though the thing itself, the thing that was presented on our platform, there was nothing wrong with that if you just bracket that out, but if you kind of like look further into things, it's kind of like that became a gateway for, people kind of going and being interested in it and then being like, oh, I wonder what else, and then kind of, going deeper down that rabbit hole and finding things that were like harmful. Yeah, and so that's a thing that we've kind of had to, sort of deal with recently as we've kind of expanded and kind of, more people have started to be involved with us. I think that the short answer, although this answer's already very long, is
long
that like...
answers are good. You got all the time in the world.
One thing that Magenta always says is like, you can't lose that openness to the world. You know what I mean? It's like, right. There are fuckwits out there and there are people that are like, going to be toxic in different ways, and you're going to bump up against shit, and you're going to have to like make difficult decisions and have difficult conversations. But it's like a thing that's really important is to remember to like stay open and to like maintain that, that kind of that presence that's like open to people, so that like someone doesn't feel like, oh shit, I don't want to approach them, what if I'm this or what if I'm that? And it's like, and then in maintaining that openness, it's about kind of like, having conversations with people to kind of figure out who they are, and not, and another thing that we kind of, it's sort of like, and it's like, if people aren't, if it's like, if it's a bad fit, you know what I mean? It's like, it's a bad fit. And it's like, we kind of focusing on the positive is about basically being like, we can't work with you, like this isn't, we aren't a thing together. And we're going to be over here concentrating on building this, and you're going to be off over there. We don't care where that is or what that is, but it's like, like kind of, and it's, and in that sense, it's kind of like, it's sort of understanding that, one thing that we'd really try to do is try to focus on how we can build something positive. How we can be, how we can kind of like absorb some of that negativity and have some of those conversations and find things out about people and sort of like trying to like actively create a space that works for the people that, that like, that we love and work with. And in doing that, it's kind of like not to try to make a big deal out of, out of the negatives, not to kind of get too, it's like these people are there and they're like, they can be awful. And it's like, and we need to kind of make sure that they don't kind of get in and become a part of this and, and poke holes in it. But what we need to focus on is doing that kind of like, I suppose, like protective boundary work through, approaching people openly and having conversations, but also being willing to have bad conversations like, we don't want to work with you. And then going, well, we had that conversation and now we need to go back to our people and just make sure that that is, make sure that like, it's like, it's still constructive. We don't want to kind of get mired into this, toxic negativity where people kind of like start hate scrolling or, or like hate searching things that are going to do damage to them. And it's like the whole point of like, doing constructive boundary work is making sure that, there's like not hiding things from people or lying to people or pretending things didn't happen or anything like that, but just, like trying to direct the conversation towards the constructive and sort of be in the context of, setting something up that we can, that we want to protect together.
Definitely. There's not a punk house in the world that plays shows, or at least a punk house I would imagine that's worth going to by my definition, that doesn't have a giant poster on the wall saying house rules, no homophobia, no transphobia, don't threaten other people. You have to have those ground rules to ensure that people feel safe and welcome, especially those of us in marginalized identities.
Yeah, and it's a tough. I think one thing, again, like another one of my tangents, but I think one thing that's interesting is like in real life scene, it's like you can just be, right? It's like I can. Right. You go to a club or you go to see a show somewhere or whatever, and you can just kind of like you can be there, right? And you can kind of you sort of you can be there in a way that's like present and passive, but you're still there. Right. And the internet's a funny place because it's like to exist you have to talk, and so it's like there's so much. It's like we're generating so much interaction, and every interaction has an audit trail. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And
so it's like things get complicated. Just because it's like things get complicated because people are messy. I'm messy. You're messy. You know, everyone, like the Headless Blood Idol server is messy. Anyone listening to this show, you don't realize that you're messy too. And it's like, you know, and so it's kind of like, it sort of gets harder because it's like people might say, you know, dumb shit might get said, but it's kind of like, how do you deal with that and like not let that kind of become corrosive in a community? How do you, you know, like there might be disagreements and some stuff, you know, there's valid stuff where you know, there's everything is valid, but it's like, you know, there's things where it's like genuine understandings or like personal frictions, and these things come out more on the internet because it's like we're forced to like continuously express ourselves to exist, and you can't just kind of like be as easily. So it's really complicated. You know, it's like you know, it's really complicated in an online world where it's like we're constantly like typing our thoughts out. You know, and sometimes our thoughts can be shit outs. You know, and you know, and you accidentally type a thought and you're going, oh Jesus Christ, why did I put that in the world? And you know, and so it's like with kind of, you know, kind of saying, you know, these kind of maxims about like what people, and we could talk about this a lot like as moderators in the server about like, you know, we don't want to tone police, and we want to respect, we want people to feel like safe in both ends of that conversation, and so it's a matter of just kind of like making sure that like the best of intentions, you know, like at the like that we kind of, that we understand people's intentions, that people kind of understand each other as human beings. But it's a tough balance to strike because, you know, someone might be mad and type something, and, you know, and then someone else might be mad and see it, and it's like things can kind of sprawl. And so it's a complicated thing to manage, I think. And, you know, having kind of like helped moderate some of the shows and having helped moderate the Discord server, I find that like there's more kind of like good intentions, you know, kind of misunderstood, and then there is sort of then there has been kind of actual hate or violence or aggression, and so it's hard, I think, online, and
especially for those of us on my side of the coin. Most people, especially like if you're, I'm turning 30 this year. I'm not old yet, but I've survived longer than a lot of other trans women do. There's a reason why, like, you see a trans woman over like 30 or 40, we just kind of call ourselves elder, because that's about as far as we usually get. And there's a lot of us, myself included, who came to extreme music because we were in a violent, self-destructive spiral. Whether it be because we were repressing, or whether it be because we were, you know, just fucking straight mad at the world for treating us like shit. And there's definitely something to be said for, as you mentioned, every single motherfucker who makes this kind of music or enjoys this kind of music. At some point or another, we've all been messy motherfuckers. Because you don't get into music that screams directly into your fucking ear like extreme music does, without needing that, without being attracted to that because you needed it, because you needed that catharsis. And there's definitely that element of, at least for me personally, there's definitely that element of extreme music, and the extreme music scene has helped me alongside of my own practice of, you know, getting better outside of my work, of helping me express those negative emotions and negative experiences in very difficult to handle ways for the audience. And so I commend y'all for doing the hard work. It's hard fucking trying to navigate and moderate, especially a community in which everyone is at different stages of getting better, of different stages of approaching and trying to find peace in the static and in the chaos. Having been, you know, around the community enough, I noticed that there's a large undercurrent of Zen philosophy. Alan Watts gets thrown out around a decent amount. I could go on my own tangent about how much I fucking hate Alan Watts, but that's neither here nor there. Fuck American Buddhism, for the record. But how would you, from your own personal experience, say that things of, you know, the, not necessarily the occult or, you know, Zen specifically, but that merging of the spiritual journey of trying to find yourself through these flames of art and of creation, how how has it helped you personally? How has this messy art form influenced your life?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, sorry, I'm going to stop saying that after you ask each question. We'll just take that as like, as axiomatic that I think the question is good.
I do my job from time to time. I'd like to think anyways.
I think, like, what's the best way to answer this? I think for me personally, it's like, to give a tiny bit about my background, it's something that I've posted on like here and there, and so it's okay. I can mention it, I guess. But like I come from a family, so my parents are Holocaust survivors, and came to Australia as refugees. And so the thing is that, like, for me growing up was that, like, my parents, like, the best quote, and if Mum ever finds this, like, I'm dead. But I remember, like, once I was talking to Mum, and she was like saying to me, she was telling me how she can't go and do like anything like yoga and stuff, because they always make her to have to kind of like do some form of meditation, and every time she meditates her mind wanders and like repressed memories become unlocked, and then she feels like she's going to vomit. And then I was asking her, well, don't you think that's a sign that you should deal with the memories? And my mum was like, nah, repression works for me. I think I'm going to stick with repression. So my family has this like strange attitude that, like, you know, basically the way that I was brought up was that like mental health doesn't really exist. It's a challenge that you have to overcome, and strong people overcome it. And so that was like my childhood essentially, and I don't want to dwell on that, but I think that the thing that kind of came out of that childhood was that like I wasn't very good at being normal, and I wasn't very good at like doing things, like wasn't very good at being at jobs and keeping my shit together. I wasn't very good at kind of like, initially anyway, I really struggled with kind of like discipline structures at like school, because it's like my brain would just wander off on tangents and stuff, and I felt like, I don't know, and it's like this kind of deep kind of anxiety kind of undercurrent and all of that. And then I discovered music, like, I think the first band that I discovered that really kind of spoke to me in this regards was like Throbbing Gristle. And the thing that really spoke to me was like, they didn't know how to do music, and it was obvious. Like Genesis Peerage, especially on some of the early recordings, it's like you can tell that they don't know how to play the bass. Like there's no guitar notes, there's no guitar tone, there's nothing. Like the drum is like vaguely out of time, and the drum pattern is like one drum, and I was like, fuck, I can do whatever I want with this. And so this idea that like there was this thing that I could do, and I could be good at it by like not being able to do it properly. That's how it kind.
So that's
actually. Yeah, it's like I was like, I can't do any, and like, you know, and that was another thing, I guess, kind of like, yeah, and so it's like I'd always been fascinated by music, and I tried to kind of like learn music, you know, and it was like through school and stuff, and so, you know, you like kind of get pushed into like a classical music path. And then I kind of realized that wasn't for me. And then I tried to, and I'd always been interested in improvised music. And so I tried to study like jazz improvisation. And I was like, but I couldn't really get my head around it. And there was like so many rules, and it was like I kept like going, what if I press these two notes they're saying I'm not supposed to press? And it's like, you know, and it was like this constant feeling of failure, I guess. And like for me, experimental music is like, I can just make my music all mistakes. And it's the mistakes that actually make the music good. And so therefore this is the first time where like in my life, or was, you know, and it continues to be, where like failure is good. It's like failing actually makes my stuff cool, because it's like no one else is failing the way I fail. My failure is unique to the way that I approach fucking things up. And that's, I guess, what it's given me personally. So I guess I've never really been interested in like, in like, it's not, for me, it's not really been about aggression per se, but chaos is just this kind of like, it's like this space where like failure is good. Failure is success.
Failure is intentional sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like, I'm not going to bother learning that because I'll just do it this way because this makes more sense to my brain. Instead of trying to learn, you know, it's like, And I guess this is something that's like always, it's like when I make music and stuff, it's like I MIDI fucks with my brain, and like digital audio works, DAWs fuck with my brain, and so it's like I do stuff with like hardware that I abuse in a way that makes no sense, and I record it into Audacity and I chop it up by hand and I like stretch it and pull it in different directions. It's like, it's not how you're supposed to make music. I can't, and it's like, but it's like, that's how I do it because it makes sense to me. And it's like, so I don't, it's a place where it's like I can make the fact that I can't do things. I can't follow tutorials. I just can't. My brain, I can't do it. I don't know why. I can't lock into that. I can't follow the steps. My brain just like races ahead of itself. I can't concentrate. I can't do it. I start to like feel bad about myself. And so like noise and chaos was like when I went, you know what? I'm not going to bother with tutorials. They don't work. I'm not going to bother with instruction manuals. I'll like, get this thing and I'll just like fuck around until something happens and I'll like it. And it's like, if I like that, that's what I do with it. And like not in feeling like I don't have to kind of like slot into discipline structures that were just making me feel rotten about myself.
It's interesting that you mentioned Genesis Peorage specifically, because a lot of her work is designed from the perspective of music is not, as you've mentioned, something you do well or something you should even try to do well. Music is meditation. It is magic. It is, especially with Genesis specifically, you have the bloodletting, you have sex magic, you have all of these other elements of chaos magic. Even right down to, I know that you weren't around for the founding, so I don't want to, without the founder here, posit such a thing if it's, can't be refuted, but there is that entire thing that Genesis created, Psychic TV and the Temple of Psychic Youth. So there's this beautiful approach to music that came out of that entire scene, as well as we touched on earlier, more unsavory characters, like Nun, not Non, or Non. Who is behind Non? He's from Denver. I should know this.
Was that Boyd Ross?
Boyd
No,
Ross,
Boyd
yeah.
Ross.
So you have pieces of shit like that weaponizing this manner of moving meditation and manner of religious practice, in noise and in the creation of sound and chaos to achieve much more racist fucking ends. But no, that's a great jumping off point, because my next thing that I wanted to bring up, I slotted in a reference here to, at the beginning of the show, I slotted in a reference to Paradise Killer, a game made by I believe, British studio, which involves not only a just stellar vaporwave soundtrack, your favorite thing, but also constant references to the Syndicate and gods like Silent Goat or Crying Grudge, and this constant birth and rebirth of these islands, which are, constantly doomed to failure, but are constantly being created. And the reason I bring this up is because of the art direction. You folks have a beautiful, chaotic sense of art direction. I'm looking at Night of the Headless Blood Idol, which I believe is the first comp.
Yes.
It's very pink. It's very yellow. It's very bright and neon and chaotic. I'm looking at, right now I'm looking at the actual Blood Idol page. The background is a stark fucking bright baby blue. The text is very 1.0. It honestly reminds me of the aesthetics of game designers and games like Goblet Grotto and other similar underground video game projects that revolve around these things that cannot be named and things that are named, and gods and rituals and other things that don't really and aren't really meant to make sense. So let's talk about your art direction. I know you're an illustrator by trade. You teach at university. How do you folks approach taking your unique aesthetic and your approach to chaos. I'm not even going to say music. I'm going to say chaos here. Taking this unique approach to chaos and putting it into a visual form, via videos, via the album covers, via the website, via your own work. How does this all coalesce together?
Well, it's sort of so and I've helped a lot with production design stuff from the second show onwards, but it all kind of the seeds of all of this is very much like Magenta and who she is as a person and the things that that make her tick. And you mentioned that the server has quite a lot of Buddhist stuff in it, and that has been a big part of her life, which I won't talk to because it's her stuff to talk about. And the kind of, I think, and the one thing that, Jen and I share is a love of horror movies and a belief in sort of like low fidelity things. And so, we've had many a conversation about the idea about the internet where you don't really need CSS. So you just kind of, you can just hack it together so that it just sits on the page, and just kind of that things in general, should look, I guess sort of handmade, and that things in general should look like, that something that you can that you could imagine yourself doing, I guess.
That very punk nature of Web 1.0.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's something that I think that we definitely share a love of. A lot of the stuff, a lot of stuff actually comes out. A lot of the graphics come out of Magenta Skull's Second Life home. And so a lot of things that are kind of like the skull with the Buddha body and the holographic skull, for example, that's in Jen's Second Life abode. And I guess and so when I came in, which was the second show, was sort of from the second show, and it was we'd had this conversation about kind of wanting to sort of step up the art direction or the production design of things. And so for me, it's always, for me personally, it's always been about being really kind of conscious of and respectful of the kind of the seed that is Magenta Skull that kind of sits in that. And I guess what I bring to it personally is I really so I teach at a design school, and but I kind of fucking hate design.
As every designer does and should.
So what I like it when things look like shit, and you can see all the edges, and it's the aspect ratio is off. And it's I'm interested in things like data moshing, and just how to kind of break video. I like and so there's this thing where it's the unintentional glitching of a lot of the stuff around VHS, getting mangled, which has kind of become a bit of a stock aesthetic these days. But I'm kind of interested in you take that
very vaporwave.
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of infected the internet out from there. Its tendrils have kind of spread wide. And I'm interested in how you kind of take that and go how do you destroy that intentionally, with a digital layer on top? And also, I really like the fact that the internet just proliferates stupidity. I really like I like terrible YouTube poop, and I like just awful memes that don't make sense. I prefer failed memes to memes that are successfully entertaining. And so it's I'm just interested in kind of that. That's kind of my angle to things. And so it's badly edited stuff that's corrupted, and that makes reference to internet culture of dubious cultural value, is sort of and that I guess that kind of has melded with Jen's kind of very kind of considered and developed over a lifetime of kind of being interested in spiritual practice and stuff. And so then there's this weird kind of the overlap point of the Zen, not the Zen, of the Venn diagram is a love of horror movies and handmade internet. It sort of smashes together into this.
It's interesting that you mentioned the Second Life, because I mean, as we were talking about these, trying to form this, so to speak, virtual punk house, it's interesting that there is actually a virtual Headless Blood Idol punk house. It's literally in Second Life. It exists. So that's fascinating. Let's expand on a different direction, though.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the reason why I would imagine that a lot of these effects, VHS filters, this return to Web 1.0, all of these factors isn't necessarily linked to just vaporwave. There's an entire school of thought of hauntology, these remnants of a past, remnants of production flaws, and these other particular elements of these older technologies that, now that they exist, as Brian Eno once said, as the appeal to it, there's been a decided and concerted movement, especially in a lot of underground music scenes and a lot of underground art scenes in general, not just music, to bring back these ghosts of memory, these ghosts of our childhood, these to replicate the nature of these artifacts as we remember them. You do a lot of sample work. How do you pick your samples? Do you tend to reach for things that are in your past that you want to remember, like, say, Wetman Chelmets does? We actually premiered his newest release, Joan, in its entirety last week. It is a phenomenal, utterly stunning memoir in audio format of his late, one of his late family members, told through Foley, told through recordings, told through these ghosts recorded on tape. Do you reach for memories like that from people you used to know or people maybe you've lost? Or do you tend to reach for more modern elements in your sampling? More...
The way that... Yeah. The way that I pick my samples is... Well, you mentioned hauntology, and it made me think of something, and I hadn't put these two, kind of ideas together. But I think one thing that I'm interested in is, so the present feels really unstable because the speed of culture, it's is the speed of a Twitter timeline, or the speed of which an algorithm renews and whatnot. And so we feel like the present moment's always slipping away from us, and that the past is feels, even though there's the past was not a good place for a lot of people for a lot of reasons. Not all different paths have different problems for different reasons, right? But we kind of reach across the divide of the unstable present to sort of I guess to romanticize this idea about a stability of things, and kind of the ghosts of that stability, and then there's that tension, that the hauntological tension between kind of the promises that were broken and the unfortunate realities and all of that stuff. I respect that stuff, but I don't think that I approach my hauntology is a bit my hauntological practice is probably a bit different, because what I'm interested in is how we don't have an unstable present, in my opinion. What we have is a fleeting present that produces pasts or produces history at such a rapid velocity that we can't hold on to it. And so the way that I choose my samples, embarrassingly, is that I use things like Twitter bookmarks and the watch later list on YouTube, and just kind of if I'm listening to music on a streaming platform, just kind of the like track function. And so what I like doing is, as I move through this chaotic and often underwhelming or bizarre mediascape, I like to kind of, anything that jumped out at me, I make sure it's bookmarked. And then when I make music, what I like to do is I like to go back and I'm why the hell did I bookmark that? And so I go and I listen to, and it's usually, it's the kind of dumb rubbish that you find on Twitter, or the stupid shit that gets recommended to you on YouTube. And the thing is, it resonated with me, right? Because that's why I clicked it. And it's why did it resonate with me? Why is this little fragment of something that everybody else has forgotten about from the past? Why is that, why did I want to hold on to that? And so I'm kind of interested in how the present becomes the past really quickly now. And it's I like mining that, it's a tiny gap, temporally, but I guess metaphysically it's a huge gap, because
right.
Just the breadth of those moments is huge, and the speed at which things flow through those moments is eye-watering. And so I'm really interested in the present past, and interested in how we hold on to that. And so a lot of my music is built around, and most of it's not built around music samples, most of it's built around, if there's any music that I sample, it's incidental to the piece of media that I took. And so it's this video really called to me, but it's got this this like, you know, this piece of a drum loop in it. And so I'll take that drum loop because to me, that drum loop connects me to that video, you know, but a lot of it's built out of like incidental sounds. So like weird fragments of voice or pieces of atmosphere or like, you know, kind of distortions and stuff like that. But what I'm interested in is like, how do I hold on to the present and make the present more meaningful to me as it becomes an immediate past that actually feels more distant than like the 90s or the 2000s?
Absolutely. To piggyback off of that, for our last question, unless you have anything else to add, you mentioned that the world is moving so fucking rapidly. It is changing. It is chaos. A lot of the movements that, you know, artists involved in the vaporwave scene, for instance, or artists like, you know, in the early days of Screamo, were doing so during times of fucked up international conflict. The 80s was, you know, it had the specter of fucking wars and rumors of wars hanging over it. You had, as a direct result, all of these action movie films, all of these things that are sampled to death now and memed to death of strong, powerful men going up and fighting things like the Predator, to, you know, reference a meme that's on the tip of my head where, you know, you have the two muscular arms clasped from that very specific scene in Predator. You have, in the early 2000s, you had the fucking Iraq War. You had 9/11. You had all of these bands trying to make sense of what the fuck they were living through and growing up through, watching their friends getting sent off to Iraq and dying. And now we have even greater instability. We have a lot of people reaching for these, you know, nostalgia bits and pieces of comfort because, you know, we had the fucking Trump administration. We had, here in the US, we had 4 fucking years of mask off explicit fascism. We have now tensions escalating with Ukraine and Russia, and we have the entire world stage centered on that. We have, here in America right now, we have the bills passed in Texas, like with lawmakers in red and conservative states and areas trying to go on a battle of one-upmanship to who can genocide trans youth and then eventually pave the way to eradicate trans people altogether the fastest and with the most cruelty. Hell, we've just lived through all this time of the pandemic, of isolation, of having to sit there and be alone with those thoughts, almost like 2 years of meditation where we can't exactly fucking block out the memories because we're sitting here with it. Everyone's had all this fucking time to think over the past couple years, and everyone has this anxiety, very incredibly justified anxiety about what the fuck is gonna happen next. You don't have a crystal ball. None of us do. But if you could build a more just world, and if you could picture where you would want the music of that better world to go, where would you want it to go? Do you want it to go more along the lines of this very camaraderie-based punk house, angry, cathartic scene? Or do you miss the calm? Where do you think the art of the future should go, if you had any say about it?
It's that's a difficult question to kind of answer for, like, in a broad sense. I think that like, well, actually, one thing that I think is really good about, you know, the way things have happened, and it's something that I really like, that I really value about what, like, the people that I've met through doing the Headless Blood Idol stuff and the people that we've worked with, is that I like the way that, you know, how we think about and classify music has become so, like, fragmented that we live in a world where it's like, you know, there are so many genres and subgenres and declinations of subgenres and you know, and so many, like, fault lines and so much, like, kind of aesthetic fragmentation that, yeah, there are tropes that kind of run through things, but it's like, I really like the way one of the trajectories I think that we're on is that like music is a way, and art in general, and especially online, is a way of us being able to kind of like present ourselves in all of our own idiosyncratic glory.
To try and build that better world.
Yeah, and it's like one of the things that's, that's really wrong. This sounds like a really naff point. Well, I hope it doesn't sound as naff as it's going to sound in my head, but I sort of have to say it anyway. It's like, I think that, the problem, that we live in a very dehumanized and dehumanizing world, and it's like a lot of the problems, even the people that are the villains of the world, it's like, a lot of, it's like that their evil stems from their inability to humanize others. And, and then it's like sitting within that dehumanization of like, we, sometimes lose sight of how to humanize one another. And that's kind of like a lot of conflict and, stuff comes out of this whole, just like, how do we see everybody else as a human, and that like humanity and people's like personhood is valid. And that is not a political statement, but that shouldn't be a matter of politics. It should be a matter of just kind of like
being a good human being.
Being in the world, like the dumb shit academic part of my brain was like the phenomenology, but I don't want to say that word because like, anyway, but yeah.
It's like a way of being in the world. It's just some more words from people we don't want to talk about.
But it's, exactly. But it's like, and it's like, it's like, I don't, it's like, for me personally, it's like, I don't really mind, like, if people want to like cling to calm, if people want to kind of express chaos, if people are angry, if people are whatever, what I think is great is that like, because like in the old days, if we want to like really de-romanticize, the 90s and the early 2000s, it was like people were always kicking each other out of their scenes because they weren't insert genre tag enough. You're not this enough to be here, you're not that enough to be here. And the thing that I think is cool is like, that kind of doesn't count anymore. And so people can kind of like, everyone's the weird person at the show that doesn't fit because the show doesn't really necessarily need to be anything in particular, and like nobody can kind of like can kind of use genre elitism, and that I think is it's kind of like that's sort of like a not a microcosm, but it's kind of like an example of like what we need the world to be, where it's like we break down all this bullshit where it's like you're not enough X to be Y. It's like you're a human being, whatever you are. It's like that's like I should approach you on your terms. And I think that aesthetically, the idea that, that you can have people that are like slowing down, 80s funk, and then people who are like, screaming over like, screaming over blast beats, and that, that we can have things that put those people together in a show, or on a release, or like in the same community where they're interacting. Like that's what the world needs to do generally, is like, we need to like we need not rediscover, because we've never discovered it. We need to find a way to actually just like accept one another's humanity, and accept one another accepting that humanity, and like just fucking that sounds extremely utopian. And as far as like in terms of kind of like you mentioned sort of like whether like it needs to be like a punk house thing or whatever, I think that like the one thing that everybody's kind of reeling from since yesterday is this like announcement about like Bandcamp pulling a huge 180 on like the entire internet music community. And
the one safe place we all had left, that one punk house we had, is now being owned by fucking Epic Games.
Yeah, and I've been thinking about this a lot, and like I know that I'm an old person who like thinks about who like has a frame of reference that might be outdated and shit. So I'm never dogmatic about these things. But if someone asks me what my take on it is, it's like the problem with Bandcamp, whether it was good or whether it was bad, it was like somebody else's business, and I understand that like pragmatically we always need to be dealing with some form of somebody else's business. But the problem with something like Bandcamp was everything was on Bandcamp's terms. And when Bandcamp was feeling generous, when Bandcamp was feeling like it needed to build community, you did that. And then the minute Bandcamp felt like it needed to sell out to a video game company, it did that too. And so like I think it's like, what I think is like, if I could create a world that I want, that I think would be good, it would be a world where like no one gave a shit about web design. Like kids ignored everything I said in my class about how to build a website. They ignored all the rules, and they just like, they made a web page that was the page that they could do with their skill set, and they hosted their MP3s or their art or their whatever on it, and everybody had a tip jar. And it's like, and we went back to like, kind of more like granular community things, like doing like, like blog rings and that sort of a thing. Like, just like click this button to link to the next one in the blog ring. And so kind of like, we need to. In my soapbox, when I'm on my soapbox, I feel like Web3 is not going to save us from like decentralization or from centralization.
Web3
and,
is
like,
not fucking about decentralization. They're
No,
using that
no.
term, and we all know it.
Yeah, I know. But it's like and Bandcamp, whether it was like a benevolent dictator or whether it was a malignant dictator,
It
was
still
still
a fucking
kind of
dictator.
right. Exactly, it's a discipline structure that like imposed its fucking way of doing shit onto us, and then we all were like, we were basically like, yes, daddy, thank you, I'm very grateful, but it's bullshit, right? It's like, I'd rather go onto someone's falling apart website to download shit MP3s and then leave them a tip that's like a generous tip. And I know that, we can't completely dislodge from centralization because this flow of capital means that we're going to need some kind of PayPal or something or other, but it's like, at least if it's like embedded in our website, we're using it on our terms, and it's not Twitter. It's not. We don't have this stupid situation where we've got like PayPal that's integrated into Bandcamp, that's integrated into Epic Games, that's integrated into who knows what's the next thing in the chain. Like soon it'll become a part of the metaverse or some nonsense. But it's like
the metaverse. We already have Second Life. What the fuck do we need that?
Well, Zuckerberg didn't build Second Life, so he, it's like that's what people in his position do. They need to like erect a monument that's exactly the same as the last monument.
Nobody
but
has legs, so no one can be like horny like they can on Second Life, as God herself intended.
So I have no legs, and yet I must run out of here. But that's my vision. Is like we need to like. I don't care if you don't know how to build a website. I don't know if like you've just watched one HTML tutorial and all you can do is like embed a link and your band name. And like, it's like, and it's like, but if I find that and the stuff's good, then like, I don't, it's like, that's, I think, and like, we've got such high expectations of fidelity, high expectations of image quality, of sound quality, of design quality, of build quality. Like, but all of those things are actually taking the power out of our individual hands because none of us have the resources to do that. So, from my perspective, if I got to choose the future, we'd all actually just abandon that as being like a form of, of kind of colonialist expansion that like makes us dependent on Silicon Valley tech, and that like by being like, you know what, I don't care, my website's shit, it doesn't load half the time, but like, it's like I'd rather deal with that world. And that's me.
Hell yeah. That's the correct fucking answer as far as I'm concerned. I do want to actually plug here, if you would like to get involved, you the listener, would like to get involved in making your own website and learning this, and learning how to create your own little space, neocities.org, I wouldn't rely on them. I would definitely figure out how to set up your own server if you can, but neocities.org, go, it's free. You get 10 megabytes of storage. You can always upload things to like Rapid Share or Mega or wherever. Make your own website. You don't
NeoCities is beautiful.
NeoCities is
it's
great.
Beautiful. Like, I used them to do the exhibit for my thesis project, and it's like it's just like it's literally all that they give you is hosting space, and they give you a kind of shithouse HTML editor. But the good thing that they do give you is you can actually just like download the site. Like you can after you've done it, you can kind of download all the resources and stuff as a zip folder, and then like so you could if like you decide that NeoCities, I don't know, gets bought out by Rockstar Games, or some shit like that, you could then take that zip folder and then you can actually get that hosted somewhere yourself. And NeoCities has like some it's beautiful.
Some fantastic tutorials as well if you're just starting out. But let's plug what we meant to plug, what we set out to plug. Where can my fine, lovely listeners support you? Where can they go to join the Headless Blood Idol cult? And where, most importantly, where are we sending these submissions to? I know you're still listening, listeners out there who are still working on a track. I know you have a whip. Finish it and send it to these fine folks. They're worth your time. Where can we send these?
So we're running the comp through the Twitter account, which is at Blood Idol Radio, all one word, BLOODIDOLRADIO, at that on Twitter, and so if you just DM us and say, I have a track, or I would like to know more, even if you don't necessarily know if you want to get involved, but you kind of want to talk to someone to see how you feel about it. We pride ourselves on responding to people's direct messages and having that conversation, like I said. So just send us a message and we'll figure out if it's for you, if that's what you want to do, if you want to be a part of this. And yeah, that's kind of the main port of call. To find out about Headless Blood Idol stuff more generally, the best place to go is the main page that has links to everything. It has like an invite link to Discord and links to archives of all of the shows and the flyers and all of that sort of good stuff. That's at magentaskull.com/Blood Idol, all one word. That's it. And you can go there, and that's how, if you wanted to connect with us via Discord or whatever, you can pop your head in there and click the link.
And you all should fucking do it, because these are good people. All right, that's our interview. doktorb, it's been a fucking pleasure. We are closing the interview out with one track. I'm gonna give you the option. Are we closing it with one of yours? Or are we going with a track from the first Headless Blood Idol comp? And if so, on either, what are we listening to? What are my listeners closing out the evening with?
I think we should do the comp. And I think we should do... now I've got to make choices. I think probably like the track that really like jumped out and surprised me from that was... I'm going to go with the hellvalleyskytrees track, Thundercloud. That's the track I'm going to go with.
Which track number is that?
Number 14.
Alrighty. Welp, that about does it for us. We'll leave you all with the fantastic hellvalleyskytrees. This is Thundercloud, right here on Radio Dark Tunnel.